Yes, love's a secret weapon. Yeah!
Hi, I'm Donna Loren.
And I'm Dr. Adam Gerace.
And you are listening to Love's a Secret Weapon podcast. Chapter 15. That's what love is made of. Joey was excited to know that I was building him a soundproof drum booth where he could practice. At 12 years of age, he was being introduced to new people who became lifelong friends. One of his friends was a guy named Smokey who lived down the street from us. Smokey played guitar. Every night, Joey would take a shower around 10 o'clock, and I thought he was getting ready to go to bed. It later came out that he was changing into his all-black attire to catch the midnight shows at the Baked Potato. Baked Potato was in North Hollywood, close to Burbank. Don Randy, a pianist I had worked with in my days in the recording studios, owned it. Many great jazz musicians performed there, so it was a great training ground for my son. But at 12 years of age, how in the world would he manage to get into an adult club? I have to admit that Joey did look rather mature for his age, and maybe that was his secret weapon to enter. Smokey, decades later, was playing McCabe's with Joey and admitted to being the driver to the Baked Potato. Joey and Smokey ultimately became part of Beck's band. Another one of Joey's friends was a beautiful young man named Tony. He was a drummer as well, and he eventually joined my daughter's band, That Dog, as her drummer. On a conscious level, Lenny and I were maintaining the family unit by making a very big move to another location close by. On some level, when a marriage has survived more than a decade, it's a habit you just don't want to break. Well, there are also so many lives involved when a family separates, but in reality, the walls of my marriage came tumbling down. Beginning in 1980, when I was turned on to Sedona, Arizona, visiting Sedona often was a great diversion for me. I even wrote a song about Sedona. I recorded and pressed some vinyl 45s that were played on KAZM radio. A music friend of mine, James Burton, who was the leader of the Elvis Presley band, encouraged me to go into the studio and re-record it. Being part of the Warner Brothers family, I had access to Amigo Studios. James surprised me with not only the Elvis band, Ronnie Tutt, Jerry Sheff, Glendy Harden, but Chris Hillman from the Flying Burrito Brothers on mandolin. In my dreams, all I needed was Emmy Lou and Linda Ronstadt singing background.
It's the cold canyon, the rock cathedral in the ridge. This is Sedona, Sedona, where the love and the people live. Yes, it's Sedona, Sedona, where the love and the people live. Yes, it's Sedona, Sedona, where the love and the people live.
And still under the influence of Elvis, only 3 years after the King's departure, James suggested I do a version of One Night. He also liked an original tune of mine called Thinkin' of You, as well as a song called Could This Be Magic? You can hear his signature guitar on this tune the best. Every full moon, I found that my sleep was interrupted and that I had an unusual amount of energy. I decided to schedule recording sessions once a month on the full moon. I honestly never thought anyone would hear this music until my current husband, Jared, was going through the garage and found some old boxes. Inside were cassette tapes and DATs that were masters of these sessions. Jared made the time to listen to everything and came back to me and said, I want to do something with this. Ultimately, that music became my album, Magic, released in 2009, along with a video that I never thought would be seen of my performance in Tokyo of Hard to Believe.
Oh, yeah. Hard to believe. Oh, yeah. Hard to believe that you leave it. Hope and hope that you stay. Hard to believe. Hard to believe. Hard to believe. Hope and hope that you stay. Hard to believe. 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 I love. Hard to believe. Yeah. Hard to believe.
앙코르 お願いしましょうよ。もう一曲。Donna, encore. Okay. Donna.
These things probably happen more often than not. Projects are shelved all the time, such as 8 formerly unreleased masters that sat in the Capitol vaults until 2014 when they were included in my compilation. These are the good times. Something had been preying on my mind since puberty. Even though my life appeared to have so much abundance, deep down, I was suffering from an intense sense of lack. My bust size had always been an issue, and finally at age 35, I had a breast augmentation. Part of low self-esteem issues is denial and the image you have inside your own head. My sense of lack and not being good enough had always been reinforced by my mother. She, being more well-endowed than I was, created feelings that compelled me to stuff my bra during my teenage years. And after having my 3rd child and completing nursing her, I was left with deflated breasts I just couldn't live with and this any longer. When given an opportunity to take action, I arranged for a procedure. I arrived early one morning at Dr. Leaf's office in Beverly Hills as an outpatient. In a somber room, I sat in the surgical chair placed in the center of the space. I was told that I would be able to leave at noon, only 4 hours later. This sounded very casual until I was anesthetized and sometime later woke up to my chest being bound tight. I felt cold from the drugs and very shaky. That night, my left breast began hemorrhaging, and so, early the next morning, I had to return to the same scene. This time, I could not be anesthetized. My body could not take the shock of more drugs. And so, in a sober state, I experienced the stitches being removed from my less than 24-hour scar. The silicone pillow was removed from the cavity and put aside while the doctor vacuumed the blood from that area. In shock from this invasive procedure, all I could do was sob helplessly. Was my feeling of inadequacy being emphasized with more pain? I volunteered for this surgery with the impetus of doing whatever, including risking my life to look like a woman. My natural size was more androgynous, especially then when my weight was 100 pounds. I was too weak to just go home and try to take care of my family, so I booked my girls and myself into a room at the Beverly Hills Hotel. My son was a teenager by then, and I felt secure enough to leave him at home with his father. After a few days of recovering and much appreciated room service, I returned home to actually a rather perky, youthful, full bus line. I was kind of in awe, looking in the mirror and thinking, that's not me. But now it was. Ultimately, I was happy that I did it. Revolution from Within, a book by Gloria Steinem, strikes a deep chord within me. She writes, "The body in our minds is often quite different from the one we're walking around in." She discusses how dieting and cosmetic surgery are unlikely to lead to positive body image without looking inward. In my own case, I felt more superficially confident, but I'm no fool. I know that's not the way that nature provided, so it was another form of manipulation to try to achieve a superficial confidence. I've hidden this information from most people because it is superficial, and maybe it shows that I could afford to go and have a procedure done for something that I didn't like about myself. But what is at the heart of the matter is that it didn't really make me happier. It wasn't until many years later, when I started delving into my inner voice, that my real confidence started showing, which is totally transformative. During the time that I was going in the studio with James Burton, I never thought of going public with any of this music. However, I did reacquaint with my 60s producer Jimmy Bowen and attempted a new cover of Wishin' and Hopin'. Someone I knew in the song publishing business, Linda Perry, offered me Somewhere Down the Road, written by Tom Snow and Cynthia Weil.
We had the right love at the wrong time. I guess I always knew inside I wouldn't have you for a long time. Those dreams of yours are shining on distant shores, and if they're calling you away, I have no right to make you stay. But somewhere down the road, our roads are gonna cross again. It doesn't really matter when, but somewhere down the road, I know that heart of yours will come to see that you belong with me.
I called my former agent at William Morris, Norman Brokaw, whom I hadn't seen in 15 years, and asked him if I could play my music. My mind kicked into old patterning of feeling as if I couldn't do this without my parents. Consequently, I invited Maury to go with me. What a time warp, being in the same room with two men who controlled my career before I took charge of my life. Norman was very happy to see my dad, told him how much he liked the music that I had played. He picked up the phone and called another agent from the music department to book me on a couple of shows. In the meantime, I don't know what happened to Maury. Perhaps when the person came in from the booking department, he must have been distracted and gone away with them and left me alone with Norman for a little while. I do recall one thing that was pretty preposterous. Norman opened up his little red diary, turned to a page, and said to me, "I had the mundane chore of investing $500,000 this morning into a partnership of a private jet." At the time, I was extremely slim, and when I met with Norman, I was wearing a white, heavy lace vintage dress and a pair of red heels. The dress was knee-length, very proper, and with half a sleeve. It was in the Victorian style and must have been 100 years old. Maybe it was an old wedding dress. He gave me the once-over scrutiny and said, "You're the next Joan Collins. You should be on Dynasty." I wasn't open to his suggestion. If I had said, "That's a great idea," he would have picked up the phone and called another department of William Morris and promptly gotten me an interview with the director or writers of Dynasty. That's the kind of power he wielded. But I didn't respond enthusiastically to that comment. My tactic was, well, let's have lunch and talk it over. We made plans for a lunch date, and then Maury and I left. My mother ended up telling me, "I know you just used him, and your father knows it too." When I had lunch with Norman, I wasn't looking at myself as an artist, as much as I was looking at myself as a producer. I thought this would be a good career choice for me at this time in my life. I had already been stigmatized by both my parents, feeding me the thought that at 21 you're over the hill as a performer. Try telling that to Tony Bennett. That old programming can really get in the way sometimes. Norman and I met for lunch at Hillcrest Country Club across the street from 20th Century Fox. This must have been his regular table because as a veteran of show business, he pointed over to another table and said to me, "That's where George Burns sits." It was a real slice of old Hollywood. Norman wasn't aware of whom I was married to, and when I mentioned Lenny's name, he said, "I'm familiar with one of his former secretaries. Judy Mazel was my client. I made the deal for her book, The Beverly Hills Diet. You know, that made her a millionaire." And then he said to me, "Now she's wearing Chanel and living in the Beverly Hills Hotel." Coincidentally, on one of my retreats to the hotel, I had seen her poolside. Norman and I then went on to discuss my new discovery of Sedona. I told him about my involvement with the Arts Center there and our vision to build an amphitheater. I had already invested quite a bit of time, energy, and money in traveling there quite often with professionals to assess the reality of building an amphitheater. Norman gave me a blank look and said, "What's Sedona?" Obviously, it was not in his radar and did not resonate with him. However, he did set me up with his agent who booked for PBS. I explained to Norman my concept for a series paying tribute to American composers. The first one would be starring Henry Mancini, just voted American Composer of the Year by the Songwriters Hall of Fame. The name of the series would be called Star Series and coincide with the Hall of Fame's Composer of the Year selection as a televised annual event that I would produce independently. The Henry Mancini event was already being staged at the Poco Diablo Resort in Sedona. I had secured him to conduct a symphony performing his most notable songs. Having the event televised would help the fundraising for the future amphitheater in Sedona. Astoundingly, the cost of a production for PBS was only $125,000, which they could recoup easily with all their reruns. It seemed like a win-win and a direction that I wanted to take my career. The previous relationship that I had with Norman was based on Maury dominating me, which I concluded mirrored the kind of man Norman was as well. There was no flexibility in his mind or my dad's thinking that I could do anything other than what I did before. Although my life was chaotic at this time, I had the clarity of thought that a relationship with anyone that fell into an old pattern would not serve me. If I would have played ball with his idea from the very beginning and interviewed for Dynasty, who knows what might have happened? I'm sharing my thoughts with you. The reality is that a man with that much power did not really respect my thoughts and ideas. I think my life was just spinning out of control, and what I needed was to present my ideas and have them listened to. I did accomplish that, but as for winning his respect and trust, I fell short, never gaining traction for the televised portion of the Star Series concert. The Star Series production did feature Mr. Mancini conducting his beautiful music in the Red Rocks and brought to the citizens of Sedona the highest quality of entertainment they had ever experienced. Being a woman of the 80s and feeling very entrepreneurial, I wasn't the only one. Madonna showed up on the scene as the material girl. Would I be able to assert myself at this time in my life? Like this young woman who was skyrocketing to stardom. Madonna inspired a lot of courage in me, as I think she did for so many females of my generation and my children's generation. And when she did Vogue, she expanded her audience into the gay community. I remember Lenny relaying a meeting he had with Madonna at the Warner Brothers office in Burbank. It was just prior to the release of Like a Virgin. Even though she had a manager and an attorney representing her, she commanded the meeting and made emphatic demands repeatedly. She didn't hold back on her use of and to get what she wanted. Just before the release of the video for Like a Virgin, my eldest daughter and her father had a sneak preview in her junior high school classroom. Oh, he got daddy points that day, and my daughter was everyone's hero. How often does a seventh grade class have an experience like that? William Morris Agency booked me on Merv Griffin's talk show where I performed Somewhere Down the Road. The video on YouTube of my performance speaks for itself. The other show I was scheduled to do was opening for Jerry Lee Lewis. When I was offered the opportunity to open for him, I had to put a band together. My girlfriend and dance instructor, Sandy's husband, Tim, came from a musical family, and I approached him to help me along with my pianist. Sandy and he were already friends. At one point, before Bruce Hornsby had a hit with The Way It Is, we did a demo of 2 of his songs at Tim's home studio. Bruce played piano and I sang. I had the confidence in Tim to find excellent musicians, which he did. For my wardrobe, I went to my favorite boutique in Beverly Hills, Charles Gallet. A close runner-up was Donald Pliner's Right Bank and Clothing Company. Charles Gallet had a collection of all the up-and-coming designers like Giorgio Armani. I saw a dress that looked like Marilyn Monroe's The 7-Year Itch in lace. This dress by Vicky Teal was what I was going to perform in. My marriage was disintegrating during this process of preparing for the show. However, I took the bold step of talking to Lenny and asking him to bring our 3 children to my performance. It would be the first live performance I had done since we were married 15 years ago. He agreed, and when it was time for me to go on stage, the audience was chanting, "Jerry, Jerry, Jerry." My band entered first, and then I walked on to people booing. This did not deter me because, quite frankly, I was honored to open for the Killer. My heart did sink a bit, though, knowing my children and husband were sitting in the audience. I opened the show with Ain't That a Shame by Fats Domino. You made me cry when you said goodbye. Ain't that a shame? My tears felt like rain. And on and on. By the time I did my closing song of a new record I was going to release called Hard to Believe, I had won over the audience. Thank goodness that when my husband and children greeted me afterwards, they were in good cheer and invited me out for a chocolate souffle at Spago, which was literally across the street. Eventually, I entered into the tragedy of divorce.
Well, welcome back to our listeners and a new chapter, chapter 15. Donna, how are you today?
Oh my goodness, reading and reflecting those times is a little heart-wrenching for me, I must admit, Dr. Adam.
For sure. And because I think you're talking about so many events and emotions, and there's so much to unpack today. There was the personal, there was the, I guess, more professional, and like any experiences that someone has that involve those sorts of emotions and those sorts of experiences, even reflecting on it sometime later is going to be difficult and challenging. And I think our listeners will be particularly grateful because you probably get quite a few questions from listeners, from fans about the so-called what did you do when you were retired or out of the public eye?
Well, thank you for being so compassionate. Yeah, it really does help to have you on board, Adam.
Well, thank you.
And yes, that is a constant question. What does one do when you're out of the public eye? And there's a lot of changes that happen, and a lot of personal growth, and it's still continuing. But this particular way of expressing ourselves and sharing information with the public does kind of reunite us to be able to create more of a continuity between the time that I was constantly in the public eye and then, of course, that enormous gap. So,
Yeah, and I think unpacking all of this, as much as we can, I'm interested particularly in how it felt to go back into a studio after quite a few years, perhaps almost 15 years, to record music again.
mhm. That was like riding a bicycle.
Great.
It was something so familiar to me. And it was just a wonderful outlet and a manifestation of I'm going to equate it to a journal.
Hmm.
When one has thoughts and they take the time to inscribe them into a journal on a fairly regular basis, it gives you a sense of something tangible,
Mm, mm,
that it's not just in your head, it's not just in your thoughts, it's not just, kind of mulling around in you, but suddenly, you can read a page. And that's what it was like for me. I could put my thoughts down and listen to them, and I can listen to them now, and some of them make sense to me and some of them don't, but it's based on a lot of kind of raw emotion. But being in the studio was really somewhat of a comfort, because it was so familiar. I mean, I started working in a studio when I was 8 years old.
Yeah, absolutely. And in particular, the two amongst the people that you worked with at this time were people you'd known for a long time. James Burden, who you had known since you were, what was it, 8?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
and
So
on radio.
yeah, so yeah, it was kind of comforting, and yet, when you do go sort of into a situation to express yourself after you've either written something or could be writing a poem or writing a story or writing a song. um, it just makes everything a little bit more real. And
Mm,
then, because I was writing these songs, it was it was almost a little bit of voyeuring, that I don't know if people, the musicians that were working with me, realized, that what I was dealing with, in at that time. They
mm,
just, they were just doing what they were doing, and at the top of their game. And I had never really seriously gone into a studio to record thoughts that were coming from within me.
yeah, yeah.
Very different. I've just listened to a little bit of Janice Ian and Laura Nero, and you
Mm,
know and when you hear the thoughts that are coming out, and it just comes from their heart, but it's raw emotion, and they're in a studio. A lot of times, if you just hear them, there's going to be an engineer, there's going to be somebody in the room um, that witnesses, what you're going through. So it's quite personal, but it's again, it just makes your life a little bit more tangible.
mm. That's really interesting, I think, and certainly perhaps our listeners can relate. I was going through some boxes recently because I'd kept years and years of boxes from when I was completing my PhD some time ago now, because I finished the PhD, started a new job, just had to pack everything up, stick it in storage, and leave it there. And even though a lot of it wasn't, say, a diary per se, or more personal feelings, even just looking at writing from that time as I was deciding what to keep and what to get rid of, it's kind of cool to look back and have something to reflect on and to remember or take you back to what that might have been like. And as you said, some of it makes absolutely no sense to me. I have no idea what I was talking about when I was writing it. But a lot of it is like, wow, it really takes you back to a time of your life. And I was just reminded as you were talking about that, an interview I did some years ago, probably 10 plus years ago now, with a musician named Kevin Mitchell who records solo work under the name of Bob Evans. And he's actually recorded, or your son Joey was one of the musicians on Bob's album Familiar Stranger. But I was just sort of having to madly Google myself, which I do from time to time while you were talking, because it kind of reminded me of something that he had said, that when Bob/Kevin was reflecting on, I think, his first solo album and those songs, he said this to me. He said, hearing those songs and those lyrics are like reading an old diary from a decade ago. It kind of makes me smile and also really confounds me. You know, it's that interesting idea of putting something on record, for perpetuity. And it's reflecting, obviously, who you are and your overarching self, particularly when you've written it, which, as you said, is different to going to the studio and, recording a song that isn't so personal. But at the same time, it is you, but it's also you at a different time as well. So I imagine, even reflecting on some of this now and what you wrote about, it's an interesting experience.
Yes, I mean, I recall some of my children's artwork at a very young age, and there might have been a drawing of not a very sophisticated drawing, but a drawing of a dog, let's say, and the dog had a tear. That really explains what is going on inside a child.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we think about even, art therapy and things like that, not saying that, not equating that with what you see in a drawing necessarily, but certainly those sorts of modalities, I think, can bring things out in children and in all of us, whether it's drawings, whether it's poetry, whether it's song, to be able to express something and to tap into something that perhaps evades sometimes some conscious putting it into more traditional wording. Because in terms of, let's talk about your surgery as well, because I think that's something else that our listeners will relate to, whether they've had surgery or not, or perhaps even if they've struggled with something like dieting or self-esteem, because I think you write quite eloquently and you use Gloria Steinem as well. And for our listeners, that book's called Revolution from Within, a book of self-esteem, from Little Brown and Company, just to cite that for anyone interested. But you use her as a reference point about how even when a procedure can make you look a way that's perhaps more in line with what you would like, so externally, without doing some of the internal work, you're likely to fall short in what you're trying to accomplish. Can you tell us more about that?
I think it's probably part of your maturity. It's like at least for me, a lot of it was how you present yourself and to be accepted. And, it started with my parents telling me, don't leave the house, at like 14 or 15, don't leave the house unless you're camera ready. If possibly I had been told, we love you for exactly who you are. And if you feel like, enhancing or something, but it was never that way. So that's the way I grew up, not being accepted for who I was. And so I thought I had to change things, but I waited, of course, until it just kind of smacked me in the kazoo, it just like, I ended up breastfeeding my third child for quite a long time, and that took its toll. And so I felt I really needed to do something, and it ended up being that procedure, which, then gave me some complications and more suffering. Ultimately, though, it made me feel like I could be more accepted for, just the image of what a pretty woman looks like. And now, thank goodness, there's this wide spectrum of acceptance for, what a beautiful female image can be. And then, of course, going back to the chapter I was reading about Barbara Streisand, and I was 16 years old seeing her, on stage when she was maybe 21. And it was so ironic, that I had just gone through, surgery to change my nose, to change my face, because that wasn't accepted by my family. And here I'm sitting on, in a Broadway theater, Barbara Streisand, being accepted for exactly who she is. That either comes from a loving parent or parents or community, or some inner strength that you have that says, I'm just okay. I'm enough for the way that I am. And so yeah, that's the way it was.
Yeah, because it's interesting, and I was thinking of the nose job as well. That chapter, which we would have covered quite a while ago in the podcast, in some of the earlier episodes, because yeah, there does seem to be this, and I think probably all potentially young women, although as you said, I think that is changing, but particularly young women of that time were often put into a box of who they were and who they should be and what they should look like and so on. And so that meeting with Norman Brokaw and Maury is really interesting, because I think being only seen in the way that a person perhaps remembers you or has experienced you, which can often be in dissonance from who you actually see yourself as, or who you want to be, or how you want to develop. Because I think in your case, Norman remembered you as a teenager, probably quite a compliant teenager. For you, I think you were very much put into that box of, this is who I am, and this is my role in the family to be compliant. This is the role in my career to take that sort of direction as well. For other people, for our listeners, it could be that their family sees them a certain way based on their role in the family or particular time in their life. I know with myself, I was a pretty rowdy teenager, and it took me years after I was no longer a rowdy teenager to kind of be seen a different way in my family. I was always kind of seen a little bit as that troublemaker still. And, that meeting with Norman, I think, is interesting, because I'm wondering how you were able to draw out that strength to be able to essentially say no to Norman's idea of you, of who he thought you were, particularly given that he was, dangling a pretty attractive carrot in the form of Dynasty.
Well, that's really hard. I'm going to, to imagine you being a rowdy teenager. But you know what? It really does actually help, probably, in your assessment of different characteristics in psychology. If you've experienced it yourself, that's kind of a good reference point.
Absolutely. I think you can go, oh yeah, I get that. I remember that. Don't stay out so late. Don't do what I did. No, nothing good will come of that. But
yeah, it's like telling your kid the same thing, but then you've got to accept them for exactly who they are.
They're probably going to do the same thing that you did, or their version of it, and that's fine too.
It's hard to accept, though. It really is.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, but the point you're making about, walking into an office as an adult and having my own thoughts, and then other thoughts were presented to me. There's something that I learned, and I did mention early on in our podcast, about ambition. And my interpretation of ambition was something that was aggressive, and that just didn't appeal to me. So, it goes back to my mother-in-law, who passed away, asking me if I had ever heard of Spinoza. And when I did some research on him and bought a book, that was one of the first things I learned about Dutch philosopher, is
Mm,
ambition is a disease.
mm, mm,
Okay, so I wasn't into power. I wasn't in, I just wasn't into that. And I was just coming from a creative point of view. So uh, maybe what the point you're making is that when I was young, I was not empowered in terms of, until I picked up the phone and called the CEO of Dr. Pepper and said, I'm going to raise my own child. And,
mm,
you know, until then, my devotion and dedication was to complying with my parents' needs. So, yeah, I mean, Norman
mm,
could have been one of these parental figures in my life
mm, mm,
that matched Maury's position, or
mm,
and one of authority, which at that point in my life, when I was in my early 30s, and I saw him, it just didn't impress me the same way that it would have during my career when I had to earn money, to
mm,
support my family.
mm,
Um, I was just strictly coming from a creative point of view. And I was also being a little philanthropic by associating with an art organization that showed me this land that they had, that they wanted to develop into an amphitheater.
mm,
And, and it turned out that I knew several people that actually could make that happen.
mm, mm,
And I took action on that, which was empowering. And yes, I think that you're right. Rather than a parent saying, "My gosh, I haven't seen you, daughter, for a very long time," which can happen
mm,
in reality. And I'm really proud of who you've become. Look at you. You're assertive. You have these wonderful ideas that may or may not be realistic, but showing a sense of pride in development.
mm, mm,
But as you say, as you're suggesting, that when you're frozen in time and stuck in power, that what we're all suffering from, right now is authoritative figures on this planet that do not consider how many of us, the majority of all life on this planet, they treat us like we're their tools to, dispense with.
mm, mm,
And so I also think that agents, as when we talked to John Hartman, who became a manager as well as he began as an agent, when you're taking your 10% of somebody else's effort, and of course you're earning it by providing them with the link that they need,
mm,
um, it's a strange relationship.
mm,
you
mm,
know it's a kind of type of ownership, which it's in some cases, which I've heard in show business, and I don't know, maybe in other parts of the world, in different economies and different politics, and that people have a handshake, people have respect, there's a code of honor, um, and that kind of contractual agreement that you owe someone something and they owe you something,
mm.
doesn't exist in a way that goes in that direction of power.
Mm, yeah, and certainly you hear these stories of some agents who have worked with someone for decades and they do have that kind of agreement, and that's a very smooth running relationship. But there can also be those experiences where there is that power, that control. We see this in a range of course, positions. I'm thinking of my own, in terms of academia, where often you can have a supervisor who is very collaborative, wants to see you grow, wants to see you change, wants to see you develop. And then there's someone who wants to keep you in the same position you're in, see you almost as they own you. You know, my whatever, my postdoc, you know, my research assistant, whatever else. It's interesting to hear it from that entertainment, you know, point of view.
Yeah, remember what John was saying about Colonel Parker and Elvis Presley.
mm,
You know, every autograph photo had Elvis and the Colonel.
yes, absolutely.
So that would be indicative of that kind. But then, you know, not to go off, but there's a wonderful documentary on a man named David Geffen, who
Mm,
was an agent of mine very early on.
mm,
And he has become, oh gosh, compared to a Jack Warner, a Louis B.
mm,
Mayer, you know, of an extremely important theatrical person on the planet. And, you know, everyone, with one exception,
mm.
that was on the documentary, and, you know, this man, if anyone wants to look him up, has an incredible history, and he was associated with John Hartman, and
John Hartman.
John is on this documentary.
Mm,
It's very enlightening, very entertaining, and so interesting to see how this young boy from Brooklyn, you know, from immigrant family,
mm,
had a vision, and you know, he just had relationships, and all the people that are you know, on this documentary honor him, with the exception of one. Um, honor him. I mean, even you know, Mo Austin. You know, everyone will say, "Oh my God, you know, he's the most important person in show business."
mm. I'm looking forward to seeing that because the documentary I think is the one you're talking about. It's the one on Netflix. And I haven't seen it yet, but you know, certainly our listeners would be aware because John Hartman spoke to us about his relationship with David Geffen. And in answer to anyone wondering, you know, when we last spoke to John, we were kind of probably up to his career in the 80s, and they may be wondering, will we have him back on? We certainly will in the future. It's just that with COVID and scheduling and everything else, we just need to find a time for us to all get back together, which we will. But yeah, I think it really does speak to there are so many ways to handle power or to work with people, particularly creative people, who I think is probably perhaps a very unique um, experience. And that idea that you were talking about, that when someone comes to you with ideas or what they want, that difference between seeing speaking up as bad or aggressive versus what assertiveness is. Assertiveness is advocating for one's own needs. And learning how to do that, I think that's a really hard thing to do, particularly when you are someone who has either had to sacrifice to someone else's wishes, either because they've imposed that on you, or you know, you're perhaps the kind of person who takes that on somewhat voluntarily, I guess. Although I'd argue if it's ever really voluntarily, you know, that idea of self-sacrificing to other people's wishes. It's a hard thing to learn the difference, I think, between speaking up for yourself and not seeing yourself as selfish or aggressive or inappropriate versus advocating for what you want and doing it in a position, I guess, of security.
Well, yeah, I think the security has to come from within. And,
Mm,
you know, speaking from a lot of rejection in my life,
mm,
that, you know, my relationship with you has proven to be so clear and so fluid
mm,
that, you know, judgment, criticism, any kind of negativity has never existed, and we've known each
mm.
other for over 20 years.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I
And
feel the same.
yeah, it's a gift, and I'm sure that, you know, I would prefer attracting that type of a person that not only comes from their head, but comes from their heart and even their soul, to know that, there's less, there's kind of the wanting of no conflict, so that you take time to listen, and maybe even if one reacts, that there's forgiveness, and there's no grudges held. So there's a constant flow of creativity, and that creativity begins with any awareness. It's like, to me, it ultimately ends up with connecting to spirit, thinking beyond what we see, what we can see and touch and hear and feel. We look out, well, where I live now, and when I was in Hawaii, I lived in areas where there were very few city lights that would obstruct the night sky. And when you look up in the sky and you see the planets and you see the moon and you see the stars beyond, there's just, it's a humbling experience.
And yeah, I was just going to say, with that in mind, I'm interested in how you actually discovered Sedona, because when I'm thinking of night sky or open spaces, that's probably what comes to mind. But yeah, you talk about it, and in subsequent episodes, we're going to talk about more involvement in Sedona and that part of the world, or that part of the United States. But how did you first discover it?
Good old Maury.
There you go.
Yeah, he decided, well, I was a good provider, right? So apparently he had been saving up some money and decided to buy some land in Sedona.
Right.
And he had an artist friend who had lived there since the 50s that kind of enticed him to go visit. And I also think that at that time, he was retired, but he was still doing photography, and he wanted to do exhibits. And so Sedona was a decent drive from Los Angeles, for him to take his artwork and show it. And I think the combination of those two things led him to be interested in buying land there. So when he told me about that, I had never heard of Sedona. And and he said, well, then, the next time we drive there, follow me. So I did, and it completely captivated me, completely, as it does so many people. I mean, the monoliths, or the vortex energy there. Some people, it's too strong. Others crave it. So, and yeah, he ends up making a little investment and turning it over, so he didn't last long.
I was going to say, yeah, did they end up living there at all, or was it more investing? Right. An interesting contradiction, perhaps, though, isn't it, with Maury, who our listeners know quite a bit about at this point, that he would be kind of attracted to an area like that, which I think holds a lot of, as you said, for a lot of people, very interesting energy associated with it.
Yeah, well, it's a very special place, and it really, it really has become now it's a worldwide attraction, like the Grand Canyon, and so it's become quite commercialized and kind of overpopulated. So when I was there 40 years ago, it was still fairly untamed, and the word got out. Norman didn't hear about it, but but
I bet he would have a few years later.
Well, yeah, one of our senators, John McCain, one of the American heroes, was living there, and who else is living there now that I can think of? Mary Steenburgen and her husband,
right.
Ted Danson.
Ted Danson,
Yeah, they live in Sedona. and just tons of visitors, and it's still a gorgeous place. It's just kind of become a little like Disneyland for
Mm,
people that want to check it out and have an ice cream cone and you know walk around. I don't know if they really get the power of the land, and maybe just the sensational views or something like
mm,
that. But I kind of last time I was in Sedona, I thought, you know, these mountains are so dense with copper and magnesium and so rich history. And of course, the Navajo and I don't know beyond that indigenous tribe
mm,
that would have inhabited that area. But I know there are more.
mm,
The magic of the land has to touch people even if they don't realize it.
mm,
It's not just a beautiful place. There is definitely an energy there.
mm.
And in my heart of hearts, I'm hoping that they're getting a little bit of a healing when they do go there, even if they're not aware of it.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? Because of course we've spoken about water in particular and the healing properties of that. And yeah, you think of the history, the natural landscape, the stories, and the generations that belong to that. I think as much as we can, which I think is only a minuscule, when I think of Indigenous people, whether those in the US or in Australia, for example.
Everywhere.
Yeah,
Hmm.
the something that we perhaps as non-Indigenous people don't have that depth of understanding in terms of the importance of land and the connection to land and the meaning of land. So,
Yeah,
to spend time in these areas is really so precious and really needs to be protected. In terms of development and often
good
man
luck.
want. So yeah, that's exactly it,
Good
isn't
luck.
it?
I mean, the
Yeah.
mountains are all of the cathedrals and the monoliths that are standing. They can't be developed,
Mm,
but they can be traversed,
mm.
and hopefully the kind of sacred energy that is there is felt when you do enter it. I had a very interesting experience one time by Cathedral Rock, and
Mm,
I was just sitting at the entrance of the pathway, and this man had just exited, and he walked by me and he handed me a rock that was in the shape of a heart.
mm.
And I didn't know him, he didn't know me, he just gave it to me, and I accepted it. And I thought, you know this is the kind of ritual, uh, reciprocity that the earth has a relationship with all of us humans and animals and all life on earth
Mm.
that gives back. And this man just found a rock that was natural shape of a heart and decided to give it to me, and I was really appreciative.
That's I think that's just so that tells it all, doesn't it? Just the shape of it, the connection to someone, and yeah, just the sacred aspect of a lot of these places. I know here in Australia, here in the Northern Territory, where one of the great wonders of the world, Uluru, and prior to I think it was last year, people could still climb it, but it's acknowledged as a very sacred spot for the Indigenous people of Australia, and so to ban climbing on that
Hmm.
came into effect, so that you can still
Hmm.
go see it, you can still go marvel in it, you can still go camp nearby, but you can no longer traverse that because that was
Hmm.
seen as I guess, a point of whether it was disrespect or trauma,
Hmm.
for this sacred spot. So
Yeah.
yeah, really important, I think.
Well, next time you come to visit me,
Mm,
I will go to Sedona with you,
fantastic.
and I hope and pray
Mm,
that I can visit you and you
mhm,
can show me
mm.
your special place.
Mm. Sadly, I have never been there either, so we will be doing it for the first
Oh,
time, which sounds criminal, really, because it's only well, it's a bit of a distance, but we have planes, um, we can do this. So no, it would be the first time for me as well. And I know that you spoke and about something quite different that you spoke about Sedona, but then you briefly mentioned Tokyo. Perhaps our listeners just briefly would be interested in how that came about, that you went to Tokyo to perform in the
Yes.
mid-'80s.
Yes. Well, I had a friend who invited me to go with her. Her family was from Tokyo.
Mm.
And she was going to rather a grand family reunion, which was being held at the Imperial Hotel.
Mm.
And so I was asked to perform.
Mm.
And so I did. And someone there made a video of it. So on my Magic CD,
Mm.
if you put it on your computer, there's a video in the very first part of the CD, and that's my performance live in Tokyo. And then the rest of the CD is all audio. I don't know how they do that, but that's the
Oh,
way
yeah. Yeah, I think, they can, a listener can put on the CD, listen to it as a normal CD. The only thing that you will need your computer for is the video. So that CD, as you said in the reading, came out in 2009. Jared kind of curated what was in, sitting in boxes to produce Magic, the 80s collection. It's important to say, if anyone is interested in getting a copy of that, that is at store.donnaloren.net. Along with These Are the Good Times as well, which is your other compilation from work from the 60s, which was recently reissued from the record company that put that one out a few years back.
I know. I was really surprised and happily surprised, that they're reissuing it. And
Yeah.
so life goes on,
Absolutely, and so it should. And you talk about that. There was that Tokyo performance. There was a performance on Merv Griffin, which is on YouTube, and then there was a Jerry Lee Lewis performance. Besides going to the recording studio, which I guess, like you said, was like riding a bike, was live performance similar in those experiences? Bearing in mind that they probably were quite different experiences, was it a similar experience?
It's always about connecting, Dr. Adam.
Mm.
It's whatever it takes, the moment that, whatever preparation and travel and whatever you need to do. But as soon as you begin connecting with those that are seated in the audience, it's a very synergistic experience that suddenly these people become part of your life, and they're giving you 3 minutes or 30 minutes or maybe an hour or whatever of their time, and they're connecting with you and you're connecting with them, and that's I think very critical of by overcoming whatever differences you have. Find music is always that common denominator, that even if you don't understand the language, if the music gives you a certain feeling, then there's a connection. And so I just feel, I don't know, wherever I am, it doesn't have to be on stage, but just walking down the street, when you make eye contact with someone, it's just magical.
Absolutely, and certainly, even in these times when you have a mask on, you can still make eye contact with people,
Yes.
and the importance of that.
That's a funny way of life, isn't it?
It's a very different world. Watching old TV, and I was watching Seinfeld the other day, and they were around the table. I'm like, why aren't they wearing masks? And I'm like, well, because this was 30 years ago, and my brain's just been reprogrammed into this. But I think it's so true, isn't it, that even in these times, there's still ways to connect. That's still the most important thing.
And I think people are getting more and more used to with Zoom, this whole kind of transformation to using a device to be closer and to see one another, not just to hear one another. That there's been a bit of resistance in that, but I think people are getting used to it and finding the importance of however you can be close. We used to just write letters, and and maybe a carrier pigeon would deliver it. So here we are in the 21st century, and we've got all of these different ways to communicate with one another. So I think it's moving in that direction. Although I do want to say a prayer with you and with our listeners that the looming conflicts in Eastern Europe are very, very, very concerning, because for me it goes back to a way of life that has never really proven to be successful. And for me, war is not the answer. So I say a prayer that please, 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 at some point very, very soon, for that kind of consciousness to be in the majority of all people on this planet, and project that out, so that when you vote for someone, or when you live somewhere, and that is just, it's not the answer, never has been. Conquering is not the answer. And for those that are into that kind of power, I pray that we see that end.
Yeah, so important with what's going on around the world and what we're hearing about. And yeah, if we take anything, I guess, away from any of this, it is about empathy and compassion and connection. And in our own little way, we hope to do that on this podcast.
That's why we call it Love's a Secret Weapon.
Could it be the firelight dancing around you? Could it be the moonlight shining